column, I want to talk about ways of injecting value thinking into requirements prioritization decisions. Most projects have many more potential requirements than they have resources to deliver them. So regardless of whether you're building software to control automobiles, manage patient healthcare records, or calculate driving directions, you need to think long and hard about which features to include in your product and how to prioritize and sequence their delivery. Your decisions will likely have major ramifications on your product's success and marketability. People have proposed many approaches for selecting and prioritizing features. The most popular ones are based on various triaging schemes for classifying requirements into high, medium, or low priorities, or on assigning points to different features and then using the accumulated points to rank the features. However, these techniques are rather naive, and they're easily influenced by the composition of the stakeholders in the room. Better approaches seek consensus through bringing together key stakeholders, identifying trade-offs, articulating value propositions, and then reaching agreement. One way to do this is through the approach I describe in this edition, which takes into account the feature's value. Jeff Patton's latest book describes story mapping, an agile practice. Story mapping addresses many problems inherent in a traditional backlog and exposes prioritization decisions to the team as a whole. A visual workspace replaces the backlog's flat list. Essential stories form a horizontal backbone along a timeline. Then stories detailing each step, or simply stories that occur around the same time as other stories, are added vertically beneath the essential ones. Constructing a story map engages project stakeholders in actively planning releases and thrashing out the delivery sequence. Agile release planning is often driven by the goal of identifying and delivering a minimal viable product, which we can refer to as an MVP. Steve Blank and Eric Rice coined this term to describe the deliverable that maximizes feedback from hands-on users at the lowest risk. This makes a lot of sense. Instead of prioritizing user stories by module, you identify a minimal slice of user stories that cut across the system and that, when deployed, bring real value to the customer. In my own Agile experiences, we've worked exactly this way. Our team has met, thrashed out ideas, and identified an initial product we can place into our users' hands. However, release planning has another aspect. Instead of focusing only on validated learning, you should also consider the financial impact of the features you deliver. The book, Software by Numbers, which Mark Jan and I wrote over a decade ago, introduced incremental funding and showed how to sequence minimum marketable features so as to optimize project value. MMFs are the smallest unit of functionality that delivers something of value to the customer. Den and I measured value in terms of revenue, reduced operating costs, and intangibles such as increased customer loyalty. And then we showed that smart delivery sequences enabled early revenue that can fund the remainder of the project. Given multiple objectives, it isn't always obvious which parts of the system to build first. The goal is to identify a set of features that maximize validated learning potential while returning real value to the customer. To complicate issues, necessary architectural decisions often impact the timeline. For example, you might need to decide whether to build the simplest possible design first and then refactor later to support more functionality, or to build the necessary infrastructure early in the project. For sure, you could follow the Agile mantra and always build the simplest solution first. However, I think it's a bit naive to believe that a simple rule will always produce the winning solution. The mantra creates a rule of thumb to be religiously followed regardless of whether it's the best decision for a particular project. This also somewhat contradicts the notion that Agile team members should be empowered to make their own informed decision. So the approach that I usually take, and which I describe in my column, injects value thinking into the prioritization process. The ideas stem from my earlier work on incremental funding, but in this edition of the column I present them in a lightweight format and integrate them into story mapping. So let's imagine that you're starting a new company called Mags R Us. This is a company that acts as the middleman for online magazine delivery. And you need to develop a software application to support your business model. You gather together some project stakeholders and brainstorm a set of user stories. These include sign-up, magazine management, dispatch, invoicing, and payments. Your business plan is to build your customer base and to use it to iron out problems in your system by launching the first magazine without charging a fee. However, you plan to start charging fees within the first few months. Furthermore, several potential magazines are already lined up to use your delivery service. You organize your stories into the story map, and if you want to look at the online edition of IEEE software, you'll see that the story map has a flow of 5 different stories. Across the top, we have the manager adds a new magazine account to the system, and then the user subscribes to the magazine. Then the system dispatches the magazine to users, the system invoices the user, and then finally the user pays the invoice. And then for each of these high-level or top-level stories, we've added supporting stories. I'm not going to tell you all of them now, but for example, for the system dispatches the magazine to users, we have 2 supporting stories that include the manager establishes a delivery schedule and the system tracks bad emails. The story map serves several purposes. First, it helps you recognize and write important user stories. It helps you to identify the critical ones and place them into the project backbone. But you still have to actually make prioritization decisions. These decisions don't change the backbone, however, they'll influence the order in which you build and release the features and their supporting infrastructure. So in the column, I consider 2 different delivery sequences. The first one is a big bang approach. In this release, all the essential functionality needed to support Mags R Us are bundled up. Although this release might prioritize user stories into iterations, the Mags R Us system doesn't come online until all functionality is delivered. A simple financial analysis helps determine how choosing this sequence affects the value proposition. In my analysis, I make a few simplifying assumptions. First, most primary user stories take 1 iteration to develop, which may or may not be the case in real life. If it's not the case, we need to integrate additional iterations into our financial analysis. The development periods in the analysis are depicted by negative dollar amounts, and the revenue can be generated only when invoicing features come online, so it increases once online payments are possible. The cash flow becomes positive late in the delivery sequence, in fact in period 11, but you'll have to look at the diagram in the spreadsheets to actually understand this better. The second delivery sequence decomposes the MVP into 3 parts, each of which are delivered in separate, value-enhancing releases. It probably will come to no surprise to you that if you go through the financial analysis, and I show you how to do this in my column, that the incrementally funded approach, the incremental approach where we deliver incrementally and we start to actually generate revenue from released features, comes out ahead in this case. That's not always the case. You have to actually plug in the numbers to find out what makes sense for a particular project. So in putting this column together, I'm reminded of the conversations that took place shortly after the release of my book, Software by Numbers. At that time, some folks claimed that software developers would never be able to make such revenue predictions, and therefore financially driven approaches to prioritization would never work. I always answer them by saying the process of financially driven software development cannot ever be done purely by software developers. It takes a whole team. So we need to have our project stakeholders that tell us what's important to them, what features they want to see delivered, and what they need to have delivered early. Then we need to have business stakeholders that tell us or predict the value of delivering these kind of features into to the general public. So they are the kind of folks that know how to make financial predictions. And it was also actually interesting that in some people that came and talked to me about it said, no, there's no problem in doing this. We have those kind of numbers. We can easily make those predictions. Whereas people in other organizations said, we don't have those numbers. We would have no idea how to make such financial predictions. So I think one of the precursors to using a financially driven approach is that you have some notion of what value delivering a feature would actually bring to your company. And I think that's something that everybody should think about, because software development should be a value-enhancing activity. So we have our project stakeholders that are going to be users of our system and or impacted or influenced by the system in some way. We have our business stakeholders that have the ability to actually make predictions about the financial value that the product will bring. And then we have our actual developers that can estimate the cost of building the software. When we take these three things, we take the importance of the prioritizations and how important it is to the customers. We take the financial predictions for the revenue that will be generated. We take the estimations of the cost and we plug it all into a spreadsheet. We can then compute the return on investment of various delivery sequences, and we can integrate this into our decision-making process.